Hi, I'm Becky Parker Geist. I'm the CEO of Pro Audio Voices and also the president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association. And I have the delight and honor of having with me Katy Byrne, who is the author of The Power of Being Heard: The Cost of Unspoken Conversations. Katy is a psychotherapist over 40 years. Thank you, Katy, for being with me today.
I'm excited.
All right. So let's jump in. So, obviously, as a therapist, you hear a lot of the challenges people express in their relationships. I would love for you to tell us about your own epiphanies or realization that these unspoken, challenging conversations are actually a serious problem.
Well, I think that one of the deepest ways I've seen this is as a psychotherapist. When I work with couples, they often come into the room kind of threadbare, like a tire that's gone round and round.
Mm.
And typically one of them is like, we've been over this and over this and over this. Why can't we just drop it? And the other one is like, I just feel like my needs aren't being met. You never notice what I wear. You don't care about taking care of the groceries and this kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
What I've seen in a penetrating way, watching this for 40 years, is that people fall in love, they want to be together. In human nature, there's a tremendous desire to belong, but we don't know how to connect. We don't know how to keep the connection. And what I got from that was terrible sorrow, but also this awareness that it's not just the couples I work with, it's me, it's my family, it's my friendships, and it's the world. We are not getting along.
Right. So would you say then that it was that this became really increasingly clear in your own life as a result of working as a therapist? That as you kind of looked back on situations where maybe you wanted to say something but you didn't, would you say it was more in that direction?
It was, yes. I mean, of course, I think everything that's passionate that we're called to do comes from our personal wounds.
Mm.
And in my early life, I saw it in my family growing up where there was a lot of argument. And I remember as a child just wondering, why can't we just all talk about things and get along?
Mm.
And of course, then when my mother committed suicide, I was in complete shock because we did not have closure. And I felt that I had been remiss in having some final conversations with her that would have been easier for her to let go, and certainly healing for me as the years went on, trying to process that. But there were many things. I was 300 pounds. I was obese. I had to work through that. I tried everything, diets and discipline and Overeaters Anonymous. And finally, I got through that by talking to basically myself about what was going on and talking to my inner child. So those are some of the personal things.
Hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question completely.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. So, well, let me ask this: how old were you when your mom committed suicide?
I
That's
was probably 40.
yeah, that's a hard one at any age, have to say. Um, and well, let me ask this question. So, I know that in your writing you say that what will change the world, and you referenced it just a moment ago. What will change the world is gutsy conversations. So, what would you define as a gutsy conversation?
Good question. A good, gutsy conversation is it's a dialogue that you don't want to have. It's It's a good example in all of our lives. It's the next door neighbor when the fence blows down. It's the divorce when you really haven't talked very well anyway for the last 10 years. It's the boss at work who you are nervous, you're sweating. You don't want to have that difficult conversation. Gutsy conversations are when you lean in instead of withdrawing or blaming.
Mm. So that yeah, I have some I wanna dig a little deeper into that question in just a moment. But this is related. This is very connected with what you just said is like, what happens when only one side is willing to have a gutsy conversation? Because
Oh,
it's a conversation is a two-way street, right?
it's a very good question. Okay, well, the first answer is I believe that it's still your responsibility or my responsibility. It is our job to have the conversation regardless of the response.
Mm,
I think the part of the problem we're having is that we all sit back and we watch the news and we say, if only this corporation would be less greedy, or if only that leader of that country would be more fair. But what we don't do is in our own personal lives have what I call delicate dialogues.
mm,
So, what that would mean is say you've got a person who refuses to talk to you, probably belligerent or just shut down
mhm,
or says, why don't you lighten up? Why bother? We've tried to talk before. It's not going to go anywhere. Those kinds of things.
right.
And so typically we decide, pick my battles. I'm not going to go there with this person. It's still your responsibility and a part of your healing to make the attempt.
Mm, mhm. Okay, so
It's radical reaching out.
all right. So even if the other party it sounds like from when you talked about that just now, like we get so consumed by our fear of what the response will be that we just don't wanna go there. We don't wanna
Right,
step into that. So what you're saying is we need to step into that and not assume that it's gonna go badly,
right.
or even if it does, just do it anyway?
Well, yes, because even if it goes back badly, you will get some feeling of closure or repair because you tried, and
Mhm,
maybe a sense of relief. But I think also uh, you just said an awful lot in that last section. The amygdala brain is still running us. So we have primarily the fight or flight response when we're frightened.
mhm,
And typically, what we say is, well, this political party or that one is, they're messed up. And so we need to fix that instead of the cure, which is listening better. The power of being heard is very powerful. And people need to feel that it's safe for them to be heard. So, that's your job to make it safe. And how you make it safe is you don't debate, you don't jump on top of them with what I call the court of law, which is, well,
mhm,
yeah, but last week you said you'd be here at 4 and now you're here at 5:30. What's going on with that?
right.
You don't do that. You make only I statements about what you feel and what you need, and that is hard. That is a heroic act.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I'm gonna ask you some more about the I statements later, but I'm thinking that really what it sounds like you're, recommending to us is that we have a kind of two-pronged approach, that we're both from the side of, "I have something that I really need to either get off my chest or I need to be heard and taking the chance of saying what I need to have heard, but also, and this seems so key to me, and is the willingness to listen, to let someone else be heard. So it's sort of from the other side of things, yeah?
I think that you're getting to something that's a very pulsating and profoundly important piece to this. I was just talking to a friend yesterday, trying to help him listen to somebody who has a different political belief. And he just said, "Well, I can't help it. It's a moral issue for me." You know, and I said, "Okay, let's just take abortion rights for an example. People get into the right or wrong argument because why? Because underneath their opinions, which are very important, there is fear. And the fear is being unsafe. What if I live in a world and my daughter cannot get an abortion? That scares me.
Mhm.
So, how do you listen? It's hard. That is why this is a courageous warrior, heroic thing to do, because listening, the amygdala brain will go crazy. Oh
Mhm.
my God, it feels like a horse running through you, a team of wild horses. You don't want to listen. And what you have to do is sit on your thumbs and
Right.
listen. That's part of this.
Yeah. So so I was gonna ask, is there sort of a way to dip one's toe? If this feels like new territory, is there a way to sort of can we just sort of dip our toe in and not dive into those really, particularly scary conversations? What would you recommend?
Yes, the way to dip your toe, and I think it is important to dip your toe, is to start with your eye, your intention, the eyeball in the face. I have this simple uh, Cliff Notes example of how to do easy conversations that you'll remember when you're stressed. But the first one is you have to say your intention first, and that is
Mhm.
your aim or your hope for the conversation. So let's say you and I are dipping in to something that we don't agree on,
Mhm.
and we're both sweating. Okay. That my job is to say, "Hey, Becky, you know what I hope is that we can work through this and maybe hear each other. What what I'm intending is that we find some way to still get along after we've talked." So that is a way to dip your toe in first.
That's
Yeah,
really interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
That setting that intention really, it seems to me, changes the dynamic. It's not about I think there's even this, if there's something like, "Oh, I'm so mad about this thing. I'm gonna step into this conversation. I'm gonna lay it on."
Yeah,
That there's the potential for, just allowing ourselves to rip into somebody else if we're really mad at them. But that intention, a positive intention for healing, um, and or to be heard and to be willing to listen, that sounds really key.
it's really key. What it does is it creates this feeling of it kind of soothes the energy a little bit. It takes the temperature down just a fraction.
Right.
And so that's one way to dip your toe in.
Mhm.
You can also dip your toe in by saying your first I. Again, it's the eyeballs on the face.
Mhm.
Say your next I statement. It should be I feel, or I'm hurt, or I'm needing.
Mm.
So let's say I'd say, "Hey, Becky, I'm really needing to have this chat with you because I feel like maybe we lost our friendship this year, and I want to see if we can work it through." That's my I statement. That's not, "Why haven't you called me? Where have you been? I
Right.
mean, what? I mean, are you that busy?"
Right.
that puts you on the attack, and it's very different than the intent. The one
Mhm.
eye and the other eye is the eye, the softer eyes, not I'm pissed.
Right. Right. Right.
That
Not the
comes
blame.
later. That
Right.
comes later. I have a place for that.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. So, I want to turn this just slightly because, we're in such a, well, being in a pandemic has significantly changed the way that we're functioning in our society right now. I think around the world necessarily. And so it seems we've been forced into versions of separateness and seclusion, and conversely, sometimes forced into togetherness because we're all like, we have to be in the same space together. So, some really different dynamics than we've been used to. So, my first question is around that is, as a therapist, w- what changes or results are you seeing in this arena of difficult conversations that relate to this new paradigm?
Well, I'm seeing both the people that are kind of, crammed inside their homes. There's a heightened uh, crescendo of divorce
Mm.
and difficulty because the things that we could have avoided, being too busy or running off to work or going out to see the theater, we can't avoid. So there's a glaring awareness in our homes and within our tribe, you know, who calls me, who doesn't call me, who's there for me, who's not, and how do I really get along with my family?
Mhm.
And there's a tremendous amount of suffering and breakup happening. Some people do come to me in time, and I can help them have these dialogues that give them great relief.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is some people, especially single people, are deciding, or some people that tend to stonewall or shut down, they're saying, oh, I'm an introvert, I'm fine. And my
Huh.
response to that is, I think introverts are just more afraid of social interaction than other people.
Hmm. Interesting.
Not all introverts,
Right.
but I would just ask people to explore the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in your book, The Power of Being Heard, you share a lot of your own stories and some of your stories of your clients, anonymous, of course, but stories that take us through some of these, either the results of not having the conversations, or sometimes how that those conversations can play out. What what is your biggest goal in getting this content out there to the world?
My biggest goal is to nudge or encourage or even push people to lean in to difficult conversations, even when it frightens them.
Mhm.
Because my belief is that the reason we've had centuries of war, hunger, fighting, separation between people and countries, on and on and on,
Yeah.
is because we haven't learned to have difficult conversations and get the wonderful relief, the joy of working those through, so that we have, instead of all these fragments going on everywhere, we have cohesion, we have a beehive, we have a bunch of ants going up a hill, instead of, we're like people going up a hill going, well, that guy behind me is too slow, and that ant in front of me is a little too chubby. And let's just divide us in half and get up that hill. And it's not working.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I'm interested in what came to mind as you described that, um, a world in which we're having more of these difficult conversations, leaning into them. I wonder. It makes me wonder if the very reticence, the more that we allow that reticence and that fear to hold us back, it that um if in fact we engaged in these difficult conversations, maybe they wouldn't feel so difficult after a while. Maybe they would. I don't know. I'm curious on your thoughts on this, but maybe if these conversations were more common, they wouldn't feel so like pent up. They wouldn't feel so kind of engorged.
Yeah, I think it's a really wonderful vision. I think it's a great thought. And I think the power of this paradigm shift that I'm suggesting is powerful by itself. If we could get moving in that direction, more of us, both personally and politically, I think you're right. I think that at some point, or your inference, I think is correct. At some point, it would be like going to the club, the fitness club, to work out. It's hard at first, and then after a while, you start to crave it, and it's less hard as you lift that muscle.
Right.
I think there's validity in that. I also think that the amygdala brain, with the fear and the fight or flight impulse, is a very big it's a big tyrant. It's a big force. And I don't know if for many decades to come, these conversations will become that much easier. So
Mm.
I think it's like, if you were going to the Olympic Games, you wouldn't expect to not be nervous, right?
Mhm.
You're
Right.
going to go up to the top of the ski slope and the whole world is watching you. I think the amygdala brain, I think we need to expect there will always be some fear, but feel the fear and do it anyway, as Susan Jeffers says. It's very it's like winning a trophy.
Yeah. I would imagine that if children were watching the modeling that parents could potentially be modeling, and I'm sure many do, but of having these conversations using the I words, approaching challenging content conversations with a civilized and intentional way that maybe I don't know, maybe that would help speed things up as those kids grow up and already know that there is a way to handle conversations without it turning into a shouting match.
You know, Becky, as I've talked to friends and colleagues about my writing and this premise of mine, the one thing I can always get agreement on, even if people are bristling at these ideas, is they agree that through education, or if the kids learn to say, hey mother, I need you to speak to me with respect,
Mhm.
that would, and then they take that to school and they talk to their friends in a different way.
Mhm.
I mean, just statistically alone, if we get couples talking to each other, which is, I call it the hub of the wheel, because the hub of the wheel is the home,
Mhm.
and then you get the kids doing it, then you've changed the world.
Yeah.
I've
That's
got a
beautiful.
diagram, but I don't know if you want me to show it or not.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna ask you about
Okay.
that in just a little bit, so
Okay.
we'll come to that. Uh, uh, so I actually wanna this is similar to an earlier question that I asked, but I think it's so important, and that is about first steps. Like, where do we begin? Especially if we seem to be or seem to be having many what feel like broken relationships. Where, maybe speak to those who may be feeling really kind of overwhelmed with everywhere I turn. I mean, I just can't talk to anybody. Where do you start?
The Take a few notes before you make that scary conversation happen, and write down what your intention is and make sure it's positive. Because if you're approaching people with what I call kind of a cactus-like
Mm.
vibe. If you're not approaching people with clarity, then that is the first thing. And I know I've mentioned that already today, but I can't say enough. I want to say something more about intention. The reason somebody can lift a truck without the power to do it, because they really have a desire to be positive in lifting that truck. That's the power of intention.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Get clear on that. The second thing is only make I statements about what you are hurt about or what you're afraid of. If you absolutely cannot identify that, so let me give you an example. I might call somebody that I am having a fight with, or that I obviously feel we are stonewalling or distancing, or there's always an argument.
Mhm.
I would start with, I'm afraid of an argument that makes me vulnerable. But vulnerability creates intimacy. It doesn't set up an attack.
Right.
You're immediately more close to me if I admit I'm scared to call you.
Right.
And I want to know, go back to the intent. Can we talk about what happened? I would start there.
Right. Okay. And I assume just maybe pick one of those relationships to start with, baby
Oh,
steps.
absolutely.
Yeah.
One at a time.
Yeah. And it sounds like from what you said also just clarifying, it seems like even just that piece of clarifying for yourself, what's behind that energy of what may feel like a need to attack or a need to blame. What is behind it for yourself in terms of the feelings, fear, or um, yeah, I guess mostly fear, right?
Well,
And what,
it's mostly fear.
yeah, or
Yeah,
hurt.
if you write down in your intention that you want to say to that person, can we really try to hear each other
Hmm.
and really try to not blame? That does help a lot.
Hmm.
But the the other really powerful thing is what you're saying basically is, if you and I are having discord, basically what I'm getting out of talking with you is I'm going to learn about myself.
Mm.
Because if I stay with I statements, I'm going to understand I do get anxious when you blow up at me. I
Hmm.
I do. I get anxious and I don't know what to do.
Hmm.
When you blow up at me, then I want to pull back. So just even that one statement would give me an insight about my own powerlessness in the face of your anger, hypothetically. It would also give you feedback about maybe people do pull back from you because of this. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
it does. Yeah. Yeah. You know,
So
and
it's really is your own therapy, but the listening is key, and you have to keep reminding the person, can we just hear each other?
yeah. In your introduction, you quote Dana Jack, the author of Silencing the Self. When dialogue dies, as it can with either person's failure to speak, to hear, to acknowledge the other, the part of the self, then part of the self also dies. And so I think that speaks to what you were just saying, is that even acknowledging others, that just being willing to listen, that is a step in itself.
Yes, and Dana Jack has written a book called Silencing the Self. I think it's really pioneering work around how we've learned to silence ourselves in a culture which has been honoring, I mean, putting on up on the platform up above us, making it heroic to dominate and destroy.
Right.
instead of knowing that we're all going through, you talked about COVID and pandemic. We are in a slow death right now. It's exactly what Dana mentioned. There is a dying that happens inside all of us and throughout the world. This is very vivid one, but it's happening because there weren't enough conversations in the first place. The United Nations could have been more effective. People who saw those bats caged could have made more comments about this is not this is a cruel way for animals to live. All of those conversations could be giving us life instead of this slow death.
Mhm. So when having a hard conversation, let's say that we've said, okay, I'm willing to at least listen, and we step into a conversation, and we talk about like trying to being willing to stay in that conversation rather than fight or flight, right? Well, if that hard conversation is turning into what feels like attacks, and then we start getting those feelings of defensiveness, like my question is, how do we discern? How do we discern whether we're stuck in a venting, blaming conversation, or whether, that might just be hurtful and maybe isn't helpful in terms of anybody's healing versus one of these delicate dialogues or these gutsy conversations that could be leading us towards more healing?
My premise is that it is always your responsibility and mine to stand in the fire as long as we can and take the responsibility of leadership in saying, when it starts to get like that, which it always will,
Hmm.
almost always, it will start to get into the gridlock
Hmm.
again. It'll start to get stuck and you'll feel the heat building. The temperature goes up. Then your job is to lower the temperature by slowing it down, take a deep breath and going back to your intention. Could we just hear each other and try to understand?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I think you're touching on another piece that I get asked a lot. People want to know when to hold them, when to fold them.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly the question. Yeah.
That was it. I
Yeah.
know it was. I know I had to take you back to the self-responsibility piece though, because everybody wants to know, okay, when do I give up? I don't want to do this.
Right.
It's too hard.
Yeah.
Um, the my bias is the only time to give up or fold it is when that means me or you, feel like we physically or emotionally cannot handle it. When
Mm.
we feel it makes us feel sick, it makes us feel we are too fragile at the time to do it. We are not feeling well, or if there is harm to self or others. I
Hmm.
mean, I wouldn't tell anybody to put themselves in harm's way, but I think many conversations on the planet right now could be accomplished with taking responsibility for doing what we've talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now I said I was going to ask you about this, and now I am about your cliff notes for delicate dialogues. You want to tell us about your it's in your face
Okay.
approach?
So, all right. I made this into this simple thing because my experience with conflict, and I've studied it for a long time, is that as soon as I get up in your face or you're in my face and we're going, oh my God, we're going to really talk about this, then I lose it. I forget everything I'm supposed to do. I forget how to do it right. I
Mhm.
mean, I have clients call me going, tell me again, what do? I don't remember, I can't do this. Uh, I made it real simple. I call it communication 101 for dummies or cliff notes or, something like that. So you just remember the face. You got two eyeballs and a mouth and two ears. That's it. So you start with one eye. That's for intention. Stands for I for intent.
Yep.
And the other eye is I, not you, but I feel, and it's usually either hurt, afraid, or I need.
Mm.
And then the mouth, and that's where anger can get expressed. And it should be in the form of pointing out your requests or your needs, because anger is really unmet needs.
Mm. Mhm.
Did that answer your question? I got to
Yeah.
show you my thing
Yeah.
now. So we can do it later, but I made this for kids just to make it really simple. So I've got a dog and a cat, but basically it's just a drawing that shows, we can get a picture of it later, but it's ears, eyes, and the mouth.
Yep.
Real simple.
Great. That's great. Um, Excellent. I feel like you've given us a lot of guidance in terms of, like, how to approach these conversations and what we might, the potential benefits and then of doing them. Um, what can you share with us about about the connection between energy or health, either way you want to look at that, and this kind of communication? You touched on it, but let's sort of focus in on, so, what kinds of healing might we experience by taking these bold, scary steps?
There are a lot of ways that we can heal. It's one of the ways is just our physical ailments. Just yesterday, I talked to a friend, and this is an example of a personal healing.
Mhm.
Uh, so his girlfriend broke her neck, and it's been a long road getting that healed. And he was giving her a hug. She's been in treatment and working through that for many, many months. And, he gave her a hug one night, and they heard this big pop. And here she's been back and forth to doctors for a year now. And it turned out that he popped her shoulder back into place.
Oh
The
my.
doctors hadn't found it, that was dislocated. And it turned out that all of the neck pain was greatly relieved because really her shoulder had hurt her more. Now, that was just a conversation yesterday. But I came home from that going, I was out in a walk and I ran into him, and I thought, that's a great example of community has got to stay connected,
Mm.
because you don't ever know where your healing will come from. I mean, my story, I won't go into it at length, but I was back and forth with stomach problems, and they gave me pills, and they gave me probiotics, and they gave me that big gallon bottle of something that kills you. I don't know. It's called the something of life, or the death rescue or something. I don't, it's this big gallon bottle that you're supposed to drink, and then everything comes. Nothing worked. Anyway, I had real digestive problems, and I'm on the phone with my girlfriend, and she said, "Do you have any hairballs?" Because when I first started my writing, it was me getting out my hairballs because I had a cat on the computer, and I thought, I'm just going to get it out, what I'm feeling. Anyway, the point is that I said, yeah, I really got a hairball. I can't go to the bathroom. I've been constipated for 4 weeks, and I'm trying all this stuff. And she said, oh, I just threw this thing in the blender with some flaxseed, and it works beautifully for me. And that cured me. I've never had a problem since that. That's been like 4 years ago. So we have to stay connected.
Right.
We are like the threads on a spider's web. And if we lose one little thread and we can't stay connected, the whole thing falls apart. But if we keep those threads going,
Yeah.
if we reach out, if it was not easy to make that embarrassing phone call and tell her the truth. But when you lean in, you tell people vulnerable things, and they might say, "Oh, I know what might help that."
Right.
That's a personal example. I mean, I feel that it's also very international, and that we have weakened alliances now. And I have one more quick example, but do I have one more second
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
this?
Go for it. Hmm.
So David Bohm, the famous physicist, studied, um, electrons and the unified field. And one of the things he talked about was the way we have been fragmented is when you go to a doctor, you've got the eye doctor, the ear doctor, the foot doctor, the elbow doctor,
Right. Yeah.
the back doctor, etc. And they don't have any way of communicating with each other. And so there's no real way to heal the whole.
Mm-hmm.
So those systems should also be in constant conversation.
Right.
And there's a longer theory about the electron field, but basically it's that we are all interconnected, but we need to find out how to stay that way.
Right. I think that willingness to be vulnerable, and I know that for many people there is, they grew up with good reasons to fear that vulnerability was, um, caused pain, caused harm to be done to them, whether psychological or physical. So that can be especially challenging. But um, if that has been your experience, but I do think that what you're saying about that willingness to be vulnerable with people that we care about, you know, is very powerful.
It's very powerful. It kind of goes back to your early examples or the ones we talked about. So if I'm trying to approach a difficult person, I might even say, this is a little bit embarrassing for me. This is a little
Mhm.
bit vulnerable. And that softens the field,
Mm,
that softens the energy, just to let them know you're going to try to offer that. And you don't have to stay in that conversation too long if they can't receive that. But
mhm.
what I say is, intimacy is into me, you see.
Oh, interesting. Hmm.
So if you can't connect with me, you can never connect really with me if I don't make those I statements. And if they're not vulnerable, you're not going to see me.
Yeah.
And it
Mm,
might be something like, I grew up in the South where I learned to have a gun.
mhm.
Those conversations need to happen.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything additional that maybe I haven't asked you about that you like really wanted to share, or cover? Um, Anything that comes up that you wanted to add in?
Well, thanks for the question. I think that the book will explain in more detail. And I think the only last thing I can think of is the importance of intent again, because all the cars on the road, we don't have a lot of accidents all the time because you get in the car and you have intention.
Right.
You want to get somewhere. We need that. That's important to reiterate. I think the other part is the wishes from the mouth. When you blow the candles off a birthday cake, you are wishing with your mouth. And
Mm,
that's very important to say when you're in a dispute or you're talking to your boss or you're in a organizational difficulty with your boss or your colleagues. You could say, I really wish
mm.
that we had more fun, or I wish we got along. And then the last thing I guess is, I tell couples, because I have learned an awful lot there about the struggle to connect. And I tell them, you'll have more sex if you just learn to have dialogue. And if you don't want sex, you can cuddle. But the point is, you will connect more at some level with each other if you're doing this stuff. And the last thing is that, we have Colin Kaepernick and Aaron Brockovich, and we had Martin Luther King, and such other people. These are the great, courageous people who speak to vision and they speak
Mhm.
to their wishes. They don't get up there on the pulpit, at least not in many cases. I think of especially with Martin King, he didn't blame. He said, I'm at the top of the mountain and I see what can transpire here. That's the vision that comes
Right.
from the mouth.
Mhm.
And he said, agape is a willingness to go to any length to restore community.
Mm. Beautiful. Beautiful. That is a great way to wrap up. So, this again is Katy Byrne, author of The Power of Being Heard, The Cost of Unspoken Conversations. And you can learn, it's available as an audiobook. You can learn more at conversationswithkaty.com. And that is Katy is spelled Katy. So, again, that's conversationswithkaty.com. Thank you so much, Katy, for being with me today.
Thank you, Becky.